Dat is toch nog altijd te donker, hè? Ja. Dat trekt al wat niks bij.
Sancties die bijten. Sancties die bijten, dat wil zeggen dat ze pijn moeten doen aan de Russische kant. Het pakket dat op tafel ligt vanavond kunnen we in onze ogen zeer snel uitvoeren. Maar het zou moeten versterkt worden. Het zou moeten versterkt worden om het voor Russische banken en Russische grote bedrijven moeilijker te maken om toegang te hebben tot de internationale financiële markten.
Moet ook Poetin zelf persoonlijk gestraft worden, op een sanctielijst terechtkomen?
Wel, bijkomend moet er een lijst van mensen gemaakt worden die de elite zijn van Rusland. En die elite die moet je raken met wat ze hebben. Dus dat gaat over hun assets, hun financiële middelen. Wie dat daar moet opstaan, dat zal deel van de discussie zijn.
Zullen ook Belgische militairen ter hulp schieten?
Wel, wij opereren binnen NAVO-verband. Zoals ik meermaals gezegd heb, als de NAVO vraagt om onze verantwoordelijkheid op te nemen, dan zullen wij onze verantwoordelijkheid opnemen. Daar zal geen twijfel over zijn.
Er staan militairen klaar om ter hulp te schieten?
Wij zijn klaar om te beantwoorden aan de vragen van de NAVO om onze verantwoordelijkheid op te nemen. Binnen de opdracht die natuurlijk het is, het verdedigen van het grondgebied en van de belangen van de NAVO-lidstaten.
Er zijn mensen die zeggen, ja, we moeten toch nog een paar sancties achter de hand houden, vooral als Poetin het nog verder drijft. Vindt u dat ook?
Als we vanavond beslissen, dan moet het finale pakket zijn. Een tweede pakket moet het definitieve pakket zijn. In mijn ogen moeten we niets achter de hand houden voor bijkomende maatregelen. Wat we hier zien, veel erger dan dit kan het niet worden. Dus zoals ik zei, als je bijt, moet je doorbijten.
Alles meteen op tafel.
seen that in the preparatory meetings, that unity was still there. So I don't expect a lot of difficulties in the discussion here tonight.
Okay. How can you say that sanctions work?
Sorry?
Final question. How can you say that sanctions work when the EU has had sanctions on Russia since 2014, and yet we're talking about an invasion of Ukraine right now?
True, but I think what is on the table today is of a very different ballgame. This is going way further, and this is touching the Russian economy at the heart. You have to know our aim is not the Russian population. Our aim is the Russian elite, and making it difficult for them to continue the regime that they have and the way they behave themselves throughout Europe.
What do you agree that European diplomacy has failed so far?
Well, to succeed in diplomacy, you need another person to talk with. And over the past weeks, Mr. Putin and the Russian regime has always said we're open to talk and we're looking for a solution. And in the end, it is quite clear that the scenario was already written beforehand, and they were just looking for excuses to execute that scenario. I don't think you could say that's a failure on the European side. It just means that that the Russians really had very bad intentions, which means that we go into another side. Diplomatic channels are being closed by the Russians, so now sanctions is what we need.
Mr. De Croo, in the past, Mr. Putin didn't seem to be impressed by financial sanctions. What else could the European Union do?
Well, I think when he sees what is on the table and what is being decided, I'm sure he will act that he's not surprised. So let me restart. I think what he will see, once he will see what is on the table, he might act that he's not surprised, not impressed, right? Okay. When he sees what is on the table, he might act that he's not impressed, but the impact on this on the Russian economy will be very thorough, and it will have an impact. Okay, thank you. What is on the table today as a package of sanctions should be put into action as swift as possible. But from our side, we will die het de Russische economie en Russische financiële instellingen moeilijk maken. Voor België het pakket dat
ik heb daar straks in de loopje wel nog geweest, maar
beslist kan worden. Ça veut dire des sanctions. Ça veut dire pas des sanctions avec beaucoup de guerre, mais des sanctions qui vont loin et qui ont beaucoup d'effets au niveau de la Russie.
Okay, so you start.
So I think that ahead of us is a very important meeting. We have to do three things. First, we have to help Ukrainian government and Ukrainian people to defend themselves. We have to support them with humanitarian, economic, and also military aid. Secondly, we have to decide on as much as possible severe sanctions against the Russian government. It's very important that they feel that the price they're paying for this aggression is really significant, that this is not something like happened after they invaded Georgia 2008 or after they occupied Crimea. And third thing, and I think this is the most important decision the European Union has to take as soon as possible, is to give to Ukraine a real European perspective. This means not speaking about after some time, after decades. I think that this should happen until 2030 the latest. This is why, together with Polish Prime Minister, we signed a letter to our colleagues, members of the European Council, also to the President of the Council, where we are proposing this. And we are proposing the same approach regarding enlargement also toward Moldova, Georgia, and Western Balkan countries. Because we think that we have to learn from the history of the last decades that if the space of liberty, democracy, respect for human rights, rule of law is not enlarging, somebody else does. And somebody else is. And I think that we have to learn something from history, otherwise we will pay even higher price in the future.
Who else signed this letter? It's the Polish and you, and who else?
Because of the short time, and because of what had been happening during yesterday evening, there are only two signatures behind this letter, but many other colleagues, especially colleagues from Baltics and Central Europe, also support this proposal.
What is your position on SWIFT and gas?
Excuse me?
What is your position on SWIFT, including SWIFT in the package and cutting the gas supply?
Everything, as severe sanctions as possible. So we support the most possible severe package, because we are not speaking here about the economic growth, we are not speaking about inflation being 5 or 6%. We are speaking about the human lives, and people in Ukraine are dying, and they are dying because of brutal Russian aggression.
Why is it taking...
countries like Germany are being cautious when it comes to decision
First of all, I'm very glad when I heard that Germany is abandoning their support for Nord Stream 2. I think this is some kind of game changer. But we have to make a step further. So we woke up in different Europe, in different world today, and we have to act according to a new situation. So speaking about sanctions, as we know, sanctions from recent history is not enough.
Why is it taking so long for the EU to announce new measures? Because the invasion started early this morning at 5 a.m.
As far as I know, there are two reasons. First is that this package is really huge. And the second reason is that the European Union is coordinating this with our allies in the United States and across the world. And this is necessary if we want these sanctions to really work.
Do you think sending weapons to the Ukraine is a good idea? It will maybe just further escalate the situation.
Well, history is teaching us that the West prevailed in the Cold War because of two things. First, because the free world organized its own defense inside of the NATO. which prevented communist regime to spread across the Western Europe. But this was not the final victory. The final victory happened with the system the Western Europe established, and because of this system of freedom, people escaped from the east to the west. And this was the final defeat for the Soviet regime. And this is exactly what Putin is afraid to happen when people will compare the living standard in free and European Ukraine with the living standard of Russia.
Are you afraid there could be even further escalation? There's talk of decapitating the government.
I spoke with the Ukrainian Prime Minister this morning, and he told me that he is 100% sure that the real aim of this aggression is to decapitate the Ukrainian state and to install the puppet government. And if we are following the moves of the troops on the ground, then we see that this is really happening. But I think that situation now is different than it was in 2014. Ukraine is fighting, and I hope they will insist. They will defend themselves, because if they don't defend themselves, and we have to help them also with arms to defend themselves, then no sanctions, not speaking about the European future, is helping. So time is now.
Do you fear, however, for his safety? Zelensky says he's not going to leave Kiev, that he's going to fight, and they're going to fight it out with or without weapons. Do you fear for his safety?
Well, we fear for the safety of all Ukrainian people, also especially for the government, because the Ukrainian government is obviously the target of this aggression. But I hope they are prepared. Slovenia was in a similar situation 30 years ago. We know how they feel. This is why we are speaking about the solidarity with the Ukraine, slightly differently than some others who don't have the same experiences. We know by heart how they are feel. And we hope they will stay safe, they will survive, and they will prevail. And we do everything what we can to help them.
And Mr. Jansa, the Ukrainian foreign minister said, if you don't approve the SWIFT sanctions to be in this package, you have blood in your hands. You need to cut the Russians out of the SWIFT system. Do you agree with that promise or that premise?
I think this is one of the decisions we have to take, but there are other decisions. The most important decisions, which is not on the European Union but mostly on NATO, is to close airspace about the Ukraine, because the Ukrainians will have much better chances to defend themselves if Russia is not controlling totally the airspace. We all know this from the history, and we have to act according to the facts. Thank you.
Do you think that President Macron was perhaps too naive in negotiating with President Putin?
Well, first of all, it's good to negotiate, because everything is better than war. But beating Mr. Putin in negotiations, if we know that he is on the stage for decades and all other European leaders are very fresh, is wishful thinking. So whenever you go to Moscow, you should know that there are differences between the words and deeds.
Thank you very much.
Has to take as soon as possible is to give to Ukraine a real European perspective to defend themselves. We have to support them with humanitarian, economic, and also military. This is not something like it's really significant. It's not something like happened after they invaded Georgia in 2008 or after they occupied Crimea. And I think it's a real European perspective. This means not speaking about after.
Good evening, Prime Minister. Good evening. Over here, please. Please.
This is something that we will discuss also. How can we more support Ukraine and Ukrainian people in the situation? I know that every country is having this discussion nationally, but also it's very important that we will discuss this together.
What about migrants, by the way?
This is something that we have to be prepared also. I think there will be migrants from Ukraine. And of course we have to show solidarity also in this perspective. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
mir fir méindech en energiedech Vigesinn menchte Moien, wo man dann mitteswert noch Propositionen merke fir op manst zevitéier fir das Bierger zu Lützeburg am Fong direkt die Echtime se vun Hosse vun Energiepreise. Die huet mich fir vu Finanze gesperrt, dat erzelwicht.
Wie as Position nu wann man bis zurückgucken, wie dir der Rugang sind, immer gesagt Dialog. Von der Haut, da vielleicht eine gewisse Fehlausschätzung hat, auch was den russischen Präsident.
Ich hatte heute ein Gespräch auch mit Jean-Claude Juncker. Der Jean-Claude Juncker und ich haben Selbstposition, wir sind enttäuscht. Wir haben auch noch gehofft, an dem Herr Scholz für ein Politik bei ihm war, noch den Herrn Macron für kurz nach bei ihm war, weiß gemerkt, ich war zusammen eine Reunion zu organisieren, dass nach Diplomatie Hoffnung durch war, für eine Lösung zu sichern. Russland hat einen anderen Weg gegangen. Wir bereuen das, und die Enttäuschung ist groß.
Oder du eine Fehlausschätzung gemacht?
Der Fall, dass Diplomatie also immer das echt, weil die muss promovieren, wenn ein das Bild abgeht, dann habe ich nicht verstanden. Wir müssen immer gucken, nur Lösungen zu sichern.
Just eine Antwort zu den Sanktionen, die Federico verliert hat. muss haut alles auf den Tisch getraut, alles ausgepackt oder wird noch etwas strikt behalten?
Das sind Diskussionen und so Konklusionen gemeinsam gezogen.
Meinung dazu?
Diskussionen, ich bin ein Teil von den Diskussionen.
Voilà. Ganz kurz, was können wir uns unter einem massiven Sanktionspaket vorstellen?
Also das werden wir jetzt alle zusammen reden. Es muss selbstverständlich, es sind zwei Sachen. Wir wissen ja, dass wir militärisch im Moment nichts machen können. Die NATO, Artikel 5 ist ja auch nicht möglich bei der Ukraine. Und bei Sanktionen, wann werden die greifen? Das heißt, wann werden die auch Druck machen, dass es auch zu Änderungen kommt. Es geht ja um Waffenstillstand zu haben. Ich bin der Überzeugung, dass heutzutage und meine Gedanken sind auch bei denen, bei der ukrainischen Bevölkerung, die jetzt die erste Tote und verwunden sind. Und sie sind wie immer die Leute, die am meisten leiden unter militärischem Einsatz. Wir dürfen nichts ausschließen, aber wie gesagt, ich gehe jetzt in eine Sitzung. Ich kann jetzt schon nicht vorher sagen, was jetzt auf dem Tisch kommt und was nachher auch als Vereinbarung festgehalten wird.
Was ist denn Ihre Haltung, wenn es um SWIFT und um Gas geht? Soll das alles mit rein?
Wir dürfen keine Tabuthemen haben. Wir müssen über alles reden können. Das steht fest. Und wir müssen auch gemeinsame Lösungen finden, wo auch jeder dabei ist. Aber was wichtig ist, dass auch Partner mitmachen. Es kann nicht sein, dass wir zum Beispiel jetzt Sanktionen haben und nachher zum Beispiel dann kann man nach London oder in der Schweiz oder in Amerika noch Geschäfte machen. Das heißt, es ist schon wichtig, dass die Partner alle mitmachen, dass es jetzt nicht eine Möglichkeit gibt, dann Europa und die Sanktionen dann zu entgehen und dann andere Möglichkeiten zu finden.
Can you help us understand these sanctions? What is the point of it? Because as far as we know, there's fighting 30 kilometers away from Kiev. For all we know, Zelensky may not be in government tomorrow morning. So what is the goal of this?
The fact is, the sanction is for the moment the only political pressure that we have. And the fact is, and that's the problem, when they will be in place, when will they really be felt by Russia? So this can take days, weeks, and but this is the only solution that we have for the moment.
And are you open to sending weapons to Ukraine? They're saying we need weapons. We're completely outnumbered.
Don't ask Luxembourg to send weapons. We don't produce them, and even the fact is,
Europe could be pressuring big manufacturers of weapons. They could be doing it through NATO.
For me, the most important for the moment is to help also the population, and it's not with weapons that we will help them firstly. So I would like to be able, to be able to find common solutions about humanitarian aid. That's what Ukrainians are waiting for. Thank you.
Ganz kurz, wenn es um SWIFT geht, in Großbritannien und in Amerika ist man ja eher dafür, das auszuschließen. Man hat den Eindruck, Europa steht auf der Bremse. Teilen Sie den Eindruck?
Wir sollen über alles reden können, es sollen kein Tabu geben. Ich bin mir bewusst, dass diese ganzen Maßnahmen teuer werden. Auch für uns. Aber Frieden hat auch einen Preis. Und wenn es um Werte geht und um Frieden auf unserem Kontinent, müssen wir auch uns bewusst sein, dass es was kosten wird. Auch für uns. Für unsere österreichischen Kollegen.
Eine Invasion in Europa. Was haben Sie sich eigentlich gedacht, dass Sie die Nachrichten heute vorgelesen haben?
Ich habe heute Morgen auch mit Jean-Claude Juncker geredet. Und ich muss Ihnen sagen, wir waren beide überrascht. Wir haben vor kurzem erst vom Herrn Scholz, von Herrn Macron, von anderen Kollegen auch mitbekommen, dass von Putins Seite ein Willen wäre um Dialogbereitschaft. Und dann bekommen wir das ein paar Stunden später. Enttäuschung ist sehr, sehr groß.
Herzlichen Dank.
This is a war against. So, Russia today has launched a severe and cynical military aggression against Ukraine. Together with President Andrzej Duda, I was the last before the war to have the possibility to visit President Zelensky, and after several hours, the war started. Of course, this is absolutely an inappropriate act of aggression, and I think we have to use all the potential of deterrence in this situation. Unfortunately, it was not the case. We were not successful enough, not decisive enough to stop, to prevent Russia from this step, which is tragedy for Ukraine, which is tragedy for Europe, and which is tragedy for Russia itself. This is not only the war against Ukraine. This is a war against Europe, against democracy, against the international rules-based order. And I think we cannot take the luxury to be discussion club. I still believe in the potential, in the role of European Union in preventing such actions in the middle of Europe. And for this, we need to take actions. We can discuss, and discussions are useful, but we cannot be forever in the discussions. We can take decisions, and we are able to take decisions, also having in mind that we have 27 members of European Union on board. And, of course, we will talk about very broad range of sanctions. First of all, economic, financial, energy sanctions. We have to grant much more visible and transparent perspective for Ukraine on the path to European Union integration. We can talk, and we should talk today about candidate status for Ukraine. And, of course, very broad-ranged support, financial, economic, social, political support to Ukraine right now. They highly need our support today. Tomorrow might be too late. This is the moment we have to act, because democracy, Europe, and all our values are at stake.
Sanctions against Russia have not worked until now. What makes you confident that this new package will?
I think we have to draw some lessons. Vladimir Putin showed disrespect to our efforts to solve this conflict peacefully. Yes, and he lied many times. So this is the reason why we have to draw some lessons from this story and to be much more decisive. And sometimes we talk about secondary impacts, secondary effects, but in these discussions we lose a sense of the decisions. And the sense of the decisions, sense of the measures we take against Russia. The measures should be efficient, measures should be effective. If not, they lose their deterrence potential. This is the reason why sometimes our actions or our measures are just simply too weak. And I think this is a good moment to find where we were not right.
And sir, the Russians say the invasion has started. What we want is a new government, and come tomorrow, Zelensky may not even be the president. Would the EU contemplate debating, talking with a government that is installed by Russia? Or is the only person you would speak to Volodymyr Zelensky?
You know, I strongly believe in the right of the nation to choose a president, to choose a parliament, to choose a government. So, and nobody else can decide who must be the president of Ukraine, especially the third party, in this case Russia. So this
would not speak to a government that's put in there by Russia specifically. They say that's what they want.
It will be the government we cannot recognize. This will be the government like Belarus government, not legitimate. And by the way, we have to talk about the sanctions to Belarus, targeted at Belarus, because this country is fully available for military actions of Russia. Is participating, actively participating in these military actions, and doing it against the brother nation, neighboring nation of Ukraine. So this is terrible, this is horrible, and we should condemn it, but not only with words, but with actions too.
Prezidente, lietuviškai, ar diplomatinės kalbos dar gyvos? Ar diplomatinės kalbos dar gali tęstis? Ar tai jau yra pabaiga?
Jeigu diplomatinės kalbos yra tik tai kalbos ir nėra priemonių, tai ko jos ir vertos? Priemonės yra būtinos tam, kad kalbos būtų pagrįstos realiais veiksmais. Priešingų atveju tai yra tik tai tuščia retorika.
Ar SWIFT bus kalbama, bus
Aš manau, kad diskusijai bus iškeltas šitas klausimas, kaip pasibaigs, pažiūrėsim netrukus.
Against Russia have not worked until now. What makes you confident that this new package will?
I think we have to draw some lessons to find where we are not right.
Good evening. This is a very sad day for Europe and a dark day for democracy, international law and peace. Putin has once again unleashed an invasion in Ukraine and in Europe. What we stand for is unity and solidarity, because this brutal aggression is aimed at trying to destroy and divide Europe. It is based on lies, disinformation and deception without any reality-based justification. Our thoughts and actions are with the people of Ukraine, who are today withstanding with utmost courage and bravery the most aggressive of attacks, and I truly and very strongly deplore the pointless loss of life. To be clear, we can be under no longer any illusion. This attack goes right to the very heart of a European model of democratic society. And this is exactly what Putin wants. He wants to divide because he's fearful of this kind of model, which he wants to undo. What is Putin afraid of? He is afraid of openness, accountability and freedom. Our Europe is based on rules, our Europe is based on freedoms, our Europe is based on values, and our Europe is based on laws. That is our strength, that is what keeps us united, and that is what we will continue to work for, because no aggression will go unobserved and unattacked.
Possible sanctions, including SWIFT.
Yes, the European Parliament has long been very, very strong on this point, that including on exclusion of Russia from SWIFT, especially for many years, that is definitely on the table, and we have called for it already even in the last few months.
If these financial sanctions don't have effect, what else can the European Union do?
Well, the European Parliament has been very strong. First of all, I'm the president of an institution of 705 members that is extremely strong with expressing solidarity, but we can also act as co-legislators, and when there was a discussion and a vote as to macro-financial assistance to Ukraine, we acted upon this with lightning speed. This is exactly what my call to the European leaders will be tonight, to stand united and to act swiftly and severely.
And President, the Russians say, well, united or not, the invasion has started, and come tomorrow there may be a new government and Zelensky is not going to be the president of Ukraine anymore. So in your view, should you have any talks with a government that's put in place by Russia?
No attack in Europe by Putin will go unanswered, and this is our strongest message today.
But you wouldn't recognize the government it's not led by Zelensky. The Russians say what they want is a new government in place.
What I can tell you is that the European Parliament and the European Union is extremely united today in ensuring that any attack on Europe will not go unanswered. Thank you.
And the special meeting of the governor. Yeah, afternoon in the morning. The morning,
Good evening. Good evening.
How are you?
How are you?
Tired. Well, it has been a long day. It has started 4:45 in the morning with the news that Russia started bombing several cities and several military infrastructures of the Ukrainian army. So since 5 o'clock in the morning, we have been reaching out all over the world in order to build a front against Russian aggression in the diplomatic side, and to build a big majority on the European Union General Assembly to condemn Russia. We know that Russia will veto at the Security Council, but then it has to be voted on the General Assembly, and I've been reaching out with many countries around the world, forging an alliance of people who want to protect the sovereignty of the nations, the freedom of the people, the integrity of the borders inside internationally recognized borders. That has been from the reach out. Diplomatic reach out that still constitutes an important tool on facing Russia. And second, building the sanctions that has been agreed more or less by the EUROPEA member states, and now it has to be decided by the leaders, and tomorrow will be formally agreed by the Foreign Affairs Council on my proposal, because as you know, sanctions is something that belongs to the competence of the Council.
Est-ce que vous allez mettre SWIFT?
With these new sanctions, will they include SWIFT as well?
I cannot go into detail. I cannot tell you who is going to be, who is not going to be. New people will be, also from Belarus, and there is a complex package with economic sectors, technology, transportation, innovation, more sanctions in the financial sector, more listing of the people. It's a powerful package, but I cannot go sector by sector to explain the details.
Est-ce que SWIFT, le président ukrainien vous demande de déconnecter la Russie de SWIFT? Est-ce que ce paquet SWIFT est sur la table?
Ça sera au chef d'État et du gouvernement de décider.
Representative, I noticed that you have your phone.
Sanctions aren't saving Ukrainian lives right now.
Certainly not. How do you want sanctions that has still not been approved to have effects? Let's be serious. Let's be serious. The sanctions has not been approved yet. How can they be having effects?
Representative, I've noticed that you have your two phones with you. Who have you been calling?
Who is?
Who have you been calling?
Well, there's a long list. More than 20 countries. African Union, in Latin America, Southeast Asia. I've been talking with India, with Japan, with...
So do you think that a diplomatic solution is still possible?
A diplomatic solution, but the time being, is completely override. You see what's happening. A nuclear power, a country who has the nuclear arm, is launching a brutal attack against its neighbor. An unjustified attack and brutal attack to its neighbor, and threatening everybody that could come and help Ukraine, threatening with the use of nuclear weapons. Do you realize how grave is this?
Est-ce que vous craignez une extension de la guerre, comme l'a dit le chancelier allemand, à d'autres pays européens?
Well, with Putin, nothing is excluded. Nothing is excluded, but by the time being, we have enough work that can happen in Ukraine. Certainly, we are going to put a strong package on the table, and as the member states, the heads of state and government to decide, and for me tomorrow to go to the Council and to make my fellow ministers to agree by unanimity. And then the sanctions will start having effects once they will be implemented. Thank you. I cannot go into detail. I cannot tell you who's going to be, who's not going to be. New people will be, also from Belarus. Okay. And at 4:45 in the morning.
Guten Abend, Herr Bundeskanzler.
Das ist heute ein sehr schwieriger Tag für den Frieden in Europa. Und deshalb kommt es darauf an, dass die Europäische Union, dass die Mitgliedstaaten zusammenstehen, dass wir entschlossen und geschlossen sind und dass wir hier zügig Entscheidungen treffen, die eine Reaktion auf die flagrante Verletzung des Völkerrechts durch Russland darstellen. Das ist gut vorbereitet und deshalb hoffe ich auch, dass wir hier schnell zu einem guten Ergebnis miteinander kommen. Das ist notwendig, um dafür zu sorgen, dass wir wieder sicherstellen können, dass die Achtung des Völkerrechts eine größere Bedeutung bekommt, dass wir eine Gegenmaßnahme ergreifen können gegen das, was Russland unternommen hat. Und dazu zählt für mich vor allem, dass jetzt die notwendigen weiteren Sanktionen verhängt werden als gemeinsame Handlung der gesamten Union.
Herr Bundeskanzler, befürworten Sie SWIFT in einem Sanktionspaket?
Es ist ganz klar, dass wir hier sehr lange und über viele Wochen vorbereitet haben, was wir jetzt zu entscheiden haben. Und im Hinblick auf Geschlossenheit und Entschlossenheit ist es ganz wichtig, dass wir die Maßnahmen, die jetzt die letzten Wochen vorbereitet sind, beschließen und uns alles andere aufbehalten für eine Situation, wo das notwendig ist, auch noch andere Dinge zu tun.
Wie soll so eine Situation aussehen, die noch weiter eskaliert?
Das ist, glaube ich, ganz wichtig, dass wir hier präzise Maßnahmen ergreifen. Und das ist eine Arbeit, die viele Wochen und viele Monate vorangebracht worden ist, mit vielen Expertinnen und Experten immer wieder rückgekoppelt worden ist. Und dieses Gesamtpaket ist, glaube ich, genau das, was wir jetzt brauchen. Und deshalb ist es gut, dass wir genau diese Arbeit investiert haben. Denn wir haben uns vorbereitet auf diesen Tag, auch wenn wir alles dafür getan haben, dass er nicht eintritt. Denn neben der Ankündigung von Sanktionen haben wir uns ja auch die ganze Zeit darum bemüht, mit diplomatischen Mitteln Putin von diesem falschen Weg abzubringen. Das ist nicht gelungen. Er hat sich jetzt dazu entschieden, die Ukraine mit einem Krieg zu überziehen. Aber er wird diesen Krieg nicht gewinnen, denn die Bürgerinnen und Bürger Europas wollen Frieden, Rechtsstaatlichkeit und Demokratie. Das haben ja auch die Bürgerinnen und Bürger der Ukraine klar und deutlich gezeigt. Schönen Dank. Die ganze Zeit darum bemüht, mit diplomatischen Mitteln Putin von diesem falschen Weg abzubringen. Das ist nicht gelungen. Er hat sich jetzt dazu die eine Reaktion auf die flagrante Verletzung des Völkerrechts durch Russland darstellen. Das ist gut vorbereitet und deshalb hoffe ich auch, dass wir hier schnell zu einem guten Ergebnis miteinander kommen.
Good evening. Good to see you. Good evening. Prime Minister, how far are you and your colleagues going to go tonight against Russia?
Well, we have a very, very difficult today. The situation is very grave. Everything that was predicted actually happened. We hoped that it's not going to happen, but it did. So we have to be very united on the European level and have to give a very strong signal. So, of course, strong sanctions, we have to agree on those. It has two effects. One is the deterring effect, but the other effect is punishing also the adversary, making the adversary weaker so that he can't make other steps towards the countries. And I must say it's a very difficult day because for us we have our Independence Day today. We celebrate our freedom today. So Ukraine is fighting for their freedom at the same time. We have to do everything to support Ukraine with practical tools, also military aid, also the financial support, but also politically. I think we have to give strong signals that European doors are not closing, NATO doors are not closing, and I also personally think that Putin is underestimating the strength of the Ukrainians to fight for their freedom and fight for their country. Thank you.
Do strong sanctions also include SWIFT?
We have the discussions going on. I think there are several elements that you know that could be on the list. So this is the agreement that we finally have, but yes, this could be one of those.
What's your position on it? Are you frustrated at the gradual approach, meaning how slow the EU has been with these sanctions?
No, because first there was only the recognition of those people's republics. So it was clear that we can divide the sanctions into two, but then the full incursion followed, where is that, now we have to put the full package that is there.
We're excited for today to see the videos of the Russian invasion, especially on your Independence Day, being so close by geographically.
Actually, there are 1,300 kilometers from Tallinn to Kiev, and there are 1,300 kilometers from Kiev to Berlin. So it's exactly the same length that we are from Kiev. So everybody should be equally afraid. Not only those countries who have, border with Russia, but also every other country. And I also think that for the whole world, I think all the countries should condemn this. We have the UN charter that explicitly says that you can't do this. So if a country is doing this, I think every country in the world should condemn this, because otherwise there might be other big countries who get the ideas to appetite for the territories of their neighbors.
The Americans are talking about that the Russian girl could be or is decapitating the government in Kiev. What does that mean?
That means that the Kremlin's approach or ideally is to change the government in Ukraine and maybe put somebody under their control to run the country. But I hope it's not going to happen. Ukrainians are going to fight, so we have to support them.
You fear for the president's life?
We have been in that part of the history. So after the Russians came in 1940s, there were also lists and people were executed. People were sent to Siberia, and we suffered, very big atrocities due to this. So I think we should be aware, and I'm petrified that these things can happen in 2022. You thought that those things are all past, and now it's all happening.
Are you worried that after tonight's package, the EU will have no more ammunition left?
EU is economic power, so definitely the tools that we have in our toolbox are also economical sanctions. But I have been thinking there are also other ways. For example, Ukraine could also sue Russian Federation for the damages that they have caused to their country. And by this, there's also the implication on those, payments that the European side or any other country has to make to Russia, so they can keep and withhold those payments and pay those out to Ukraine. That's also maybe a very fresh thought, but there are other tools in the toolbox for all the countries to think about, not only European Union countries.
What do you think about the security situation of your own country? Aren't you afraid that this conflict might just blow up and escalate and we will be all in it?
We should all be afraid, but we don't see direct military threat at our borders right now. Of course, we see cyber attacks, but we are maybe more used to those. Every country should be also aware of the cybersecurity situation in their countries. So I think equally the whole Europe should be very concerned regarding what is going on in Ukraine.
Do you think that Western Europe was rather naive when it comes to Putin?
We definitely have more know-how of how Russia operates, and it is not a democracy. So Kremlin and Putin's administration is not thinking like we are thinking, and we. Therefore, it's very hard to understand for the Western world who haven't really experienced this on their skin.
So Macron was too fresh to go to Moscow.
No, I don't think it's wrong that the different countries wanted to have a dialogue with Russia, because everybody wanted to keep them doing what they're doing right now. So I think all the efforts are necessary for a dialogue. But what we see today is that Russia was just playing. They didn't have any wish to really have a dialogue. I think their idea was to try to pressure something out of NATO, out of EU, some kind of concessions in addition to, Ukraine. But I'm glad that our unity kept and no such concessions were given, even small ones. I think it's important. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. It's been a long day. How are you today?
Right now, Europe is experiencing the biggest military invasion since the Second World War. Putin's regime, it turns out, together with the Belarusian regime, are literally attacking with tanks, guns, missiles, soldiers, a free and independent, peaceful neighboring country, Ukraine, blatantly disregarding international law, any common decency, and of course overstepping and not acknowledging the right of national self-determination. We're meeting tonight to say what is Europe's combined response to that. And our response has to be united, and it has to be broad, and it has to be deep. So we need to say very clearly to Putin that this is by no means acceptable. And the general direction is to isolate ever more Putin and his regime from the rest of the world through the various sanctions. What's very important is that the sanctions are coordinated. That is, between the European Union, the United States, Canada, Great Britain, Japan, Australia, throughout the democratic world. The first wave of sanctions were very swift and very coordinated. I'm hoping that the next wave, which is today, that these will be equally coordinated, swift, and united. A second point, which is extremely important, that we all, as democratic nations, need to continue to support Ukraine.
Ukraine needs two kinds of support. It needs financial support because the war effort and the lack of investment, etc., that's costing them an enormous amount of money. We need to continue supporting Ukraine financially. And the second aspect is militarily. Also, my country, the Baltic countries, Poland, some others are supporting Ukraine militarily. We think it's extremely important. They are fighting back. We need to give them the tools, the ammunition, the weapons to help them put up this resistance. It, I think, is our moral right as peace-loving democracies.
Will this wave of sanctions include cutting Russia off SWIFT?
SWIFT, I think it's a very right direction. I think we should go in this direction. But what is key, and it would work only if this is a worldwide agreement. That is, it would not be enough only for Europe or some other, but it would have to be everyone combined together.
What can you say about Ukraine's military defense? You just mentioned Lithuania supporting militarily. What can you say about how the defense has gone today?
Well, I've been in meetings and in a plane. I'm not reading the latest news, but certainly the Ukrainians are putting up a fight. It's very uneven. That is, Russia's military might and the amount of firepower that they have concentrated on Ukraine is immense. But they are fighting, and I'm convinced they will continue to fight.
If Mr. Putin isn't impressed by the new sanctions regime, do you think he could invade the Baltic states next?
The Baltic states are part of NATO. Ukraine is not part of NATO. That is the sad reality. So in the Baltic states, we have, if I'm not mistaken, 27 out of 30 NATO member state militaries in our region, even as we speak. And these militaries, even as we speak, are being upgraded. So just today, a first wave of additional American soldiers and equipment arrived in my country. The Canadians are sending also men and equipment. Germany is doing the same. Great Britain is doing the same. So the forces in the Baltics are not just our own military forces, but there are, say, in Latvia, it's at all times 10 other NATO member state militaries, now 11 with the United States coming on board, and those militaries are being augmented. So it's very different. In NATO, we have Article 5 today. The NATO meeting was extremely powerful. An attack against one is an attack against all. And literally in the Baltics, if one were to attack, you would physically end up attacking basically all other NATO member states. So this is different. We're not so concerned about the military threat as the threat to democracy as such, because Putin's goal is not very clearly defined. But it's very clear as one thing. He is fighting against democracy. We all live in democratic national countries. Putin disregards this. He is thinking still in terms of empire. He's trying to create an empire. So if he can attack Ukraine, theoretically, it could be any other European country, because the democratic ideas, if they were to get to Russia, they could overturn his government, and he's fighting for power. We're all politicians. I'm also facing elections in October. The way I am going about is convincing people what I have done good for society. How Putin does it is by jailing, by arresting, by making opposition illegal. There have even been people who have been killed in Russia in the opposition by silencing the opposition. This is a completely different world, and this is what he is fighting against, our way. Actually, it's our way of life that he's fighting against.
Prime Minister, the President's question would actually say, you ask one question, please. Prime Minister, President Putin would actually say that it's that military build-up of NATO in eastern parts of Europe that is the problem. By increasing those military troops in eastern parts of Ukraine now, aren't you making the problem even worse?
Okay, so when a woman is raped, the rapist says it was the way that she was dressed, she was provocative. That's hogwash. It's the same here. NATO is a defensive alliance that countries such as mine wanted to join. Why? Because we feel threatened by Russia. It is a defensive alliance. NATO is not and never will encroach on anyone, and Putin knows this very well. This is the most meaningless argument that he puts. NATO is not the threat. The threat is Ukrainian independence and democracy. That's what he's fighting to squash, and that is what we have to stand up against.
Can you hear from Zelensky's life and the government's life?
There is military activity. There's a war going on in Ukraine. I'm concerned about everyone's well-being in Ukraine.
The Americans say the goal is to decapitate the government. What does that mean?
Again, Putin is putting in tanks, guns, soldiers, and missiles to annihilate Ukraine's independence. Full stop.
Is it true that Hungary at the NATO is blocking Ukraine's access to the NATO's cyber defense tool? This was said by the Ukrainian defense minister. Do you know about this issue?
I don't have any information on that.
Sir, do you think we have been too naive when it comes to Putin, especially Western Europe?
I think that for many years, many in Europe who have wanted peace have assumed that Putin also wants peace. This turns out to be blatantly wrong. Putin is actually wanting and creating this war without any pretext. There is no reason for this war. It's his own mind and a very skewed and perverse reading of history, which is having him send his own soldiers, many of whom will also die. It's senseless. And this is what we have to understand. History has seen before, in World War II, a deluded autocrat creating misery for millions. We're seeing the same thing today. And we have to understand that this is what the beginning of a war like that must have felt like, that you have a deluded autocrat who is attacking a neighbor. If we do not stand up to that, what is it that we stand for? Thank you very much.
For us, we have our Independence Day today. We celebrate our freedom. The situation is very grave. Everything that was predicted actually happened. We thought that, we hoped that it's not going to. Is that, I mean, now we have to put the full package that is there.
So there's no concern for the
Europeans. See the videos of
very united on the European level, and have to give a very strong signal. So, of course, strong sanctions. We have to agree.
An independent, peaceful neighboring country, Ukraine, blatantly disregarding international law, any common decency regime from the rest of the world through the various sanctions. What's very important is that the sanctions are coordinated, that is, between the European Union, the United States. Right now, Europe is experiencing the biggest military
Vieni con il collega.